Section 54 of the Endeavour Journal of Sir Joseph Banks, Journal from 25 August 1768 to 12 July 1771 by Joseph Banks. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Gail Timmerman Vaughan. Section 54. Some Account of Batavia, Part 2. Few parts of the world, I believe, are better furnished with necessaries, as well as luxuries of life, than the island of Java. The unhealthiness of the country about Batavia is in this particular rather an advantage to it, for the very cause of it, a low, flat situation, is likewise the cause of a fruitfulness of soil hardly to be paralleled, which is sufficiently testified by the flourishing condition of the immense quantities of fruit trees all round the town, as well as by the quantity and excellence of their crops of sugar-cane, rice, Indian corn, etc., etc. Indeed, the whole island is allowed to be uncommonly fruitful by those who have seen it, and in general as wholesome, excepting only in such low fenny spots as the neighbourhood of Batavia, far fitter to sow rice upon than to build towns. The tame quadrupeds are horses, cattle, buffaloes, sheep, goats, and hogs. The horses are small, never exceeding in size what we call a stout Galloway, but nimble and spirited. They are said to have been found here when the Europeans first came round the Cape of Good Hope. The cattle are said to be the same as those in Europe, but differ from them in appearance so much that I am inclined to doubt. They have, however, the polyuria, which naturalists make to be the distinguishing mark of our species. On the other hand, they are found wild not only on Java, but on several of the eastern islands. The flesh of those that I eat in Batavia was rather finer grained than European beef, but much drier, and always terribly lean. Buffaloes are very plentiful, but the Dutch are so much prejudiced against them that they will not at all eat their flesh, nor even drink their milk, affirming that it causes fevers. The natives, however, and Chinese do both, and have no such opinion concerning them. Their sheep, which are that sort whose ears hang down and have hair instead of wool, are most intolerably bad, lean, and tough to the last degree. They have, however, a few Cape sheep, which are excellent, though intolerably dear. We gave £2 5s. apiece for 4, which we bought for sea stock, the heaviest of which weighed only 45 pounds. Their goats are much of a par with their sheep, but their hogs are certainly excellent, especially the Chinese, which are so immensely fat that no one thinks of buying the fat with the lean. The butcher, when you buy it, cuts off as much as you please and sells it to his countrymen, the Chinese, who melt it down and eat it instead of butter with their rice. Notwithstanding the excellence of this pork, the Dutch are so prejudiced in favour of everything which comes from fatherland that they will not at all eat it, but use entirely the Dutch breed, which are sold as much dearer than the Chinese here as Chinese are dearer than them in Europe. Besides these domestic animals, their woods afford some wild horses and cattle, but these only in the distant mountains, and they are very scarce. Buffaloes are not wild upon Java, though they are upon Macassar, and several of the eastern islands plentifully. The neighbourhood of Batavia, however, is pretty plentifully supplied with deer of 2 kinds, and wild hogs, both which are very good meat, and often shot by the Portuguese, who sell them tolerably cheap. Monkeys also there are, though but few in the neighbourhood of Batavia. On the mountains, and in the more desert part of the island, are tigers, it is said in too great abundance, and some rhinoceroses, but neither of these animals are ever heard of in the neighbourhood of Batavia, or indeed any well-peopled part of the island. Fish are in immense plenty, many sorts of them very excellent, and inconceivably cheap. But the Dutch, true to the dictates of luxury, buy none of these, which are scarce. We, who in the course of our long migration in the warm latitudes had learned the real excellence of many of the cheapest sorts, wondered much at seeing them the food of none but slaves. On inquiry, however, of a sensible housekeeper, he told us that he as well as us knew that for 1 shilling he could purchase a better dish of fish than he did for 10. But, said he, I dare not do it, for should it be known that I did, I should be looked upon in the same light as one in Europe who covered his table with offals, fit for nothing but beggars or dogs. Turtle is also here in abundance, but despised by Europeans. Indeed, for what reason I know not. It is neither so sweet nor so fat as our West India turtle, even in England. They have also a kind of large lizards or iguanas, some of which are said to be as thick as a man's thigh. I shot one about 5 feet long, and it proved very good meat. Poultry is prodigiously plentiful. Very large fowls, ducks also, and geese are cheap. Pigeons are rather dear, and turkeys extravagant. In general, what we eat at Batavia were lean and dry, but this I am convinced proceeds from being ill-fed, as I have eat there of every kind as good or better than commonly met with in Europe. Wild fowl in general is here scarce. I saw during my stay one wild duck in the fields, but never one to be sold. Snipes, however, of 2 kinds, one exactly the same as those in Europe, and a kind of thrushes are plentifully sold every day by the Portuguese, who, for I know not what reason, seem to monopolize all the wild game. Nor is the earth less fruitful of vegetables than she is of animals. Rice, which everybody knows is to the inhabitants of these countries the common corn which serves instead of bread, is very plentiful. One kind of it is planted here, and in many of the eastern islands, which in the western parts of India is totally unknown. It is called by the natives paddy gunung, that is, mountain rice. This, contrary to the other sort, which must be under water 3 parts of the time of its growth, is planted upon the sides of hills, where no water but rain can possibly come. They take, however, the advantage of planting it in the beginning of the rainy season, by which means they reap it in the beginning of the dry. How far this kind of rice might be useful in our West Indian islands, where they grow no bread corn at all, I leave to the judgment of those who know their respective interests, and whether the cassava or manihot, their substitute for bread, is not as wholesome and cheaper than anything else which could be introduced among them. Besides rice, they grow also Indian corn or maize, which they gather when young, and toast in the ear. They have also vast variety of kidney beans and lentils, which they call kajang, and make a great part of the food of the common people. They also have millet, yams, both wet and dry, sweet potatoes, and some European potatoes, not to be despised, but dear. Their gardens produce cabbage, lettuce, cucumbers, radishes, China white radishes, which boil almost as well as turnips, carrots, parsley, celery, pigeon peas, Psittacis kajan, kidney beans of 2 sorts, Dolichos chinensis and lignosus, eggplant, Solanum melangina, which eats delicately broiled with pepper and salt, a kind of greens much like spinach, Convolvulus reptans, onions, very small but good, asparagus, scarce and very bad. They had also some strong-smelling European plants, as sage, hyssop, and rue, which they thought smelt much stronger here than in their native soils, though I cannot say I was sensible of it. But the produce of the earth from whence they derive the greatest advantage is sugar. Of it they grow immense quantities, and have vast crops, with little care of the finest, largest canes imaginable, which I am inclined to believe contain in an equal quantity a far larger proportion of sugar than our West India ones. White sugar is sold here for about 2.5d a pound, besides which the molasses makes their arrack, in which, as in rum, it is the chief ingredient, a small quantity of rice only, and some coconut wine being added, which I suppose gives it its particular flavour. Indigo also they grow a little of, but I believe no more than is necessary for their own use. The fruits of the East Indies are in general so much cried up by those who have eat of them, and so much preferred to our European ones, that I shall give a full list of all the sorts which were in season during our stay, and afterwards my judgment of each, which I must confess is not so much in their favour as that of the generality of Europeans after their return home, though while here I did not find that they were more fond of them or spoke more in their praise when compared with European fruits than I did. Pineapple, Bromelia ananas, sweet oranges, Citrus auranticinans, pumelos, Citrus decumanus, lemon, Citrus medica limon, lime, citrus, mango, Mangifera indica, bananas, musa, grapes, Vitis vinifera, tamarinds, Tamarindus indica, watermelons, Cucurbita citrulus, pumpkins, Cucurbita pepo, pawpaws, Carica papaya, guava, Psidium pomiferum, sweet sop, Annona squamosa, custard apple, Annona reticulata, cashew apple, Anacardium occidentale, coconut, Cocos nucifera, mangostan, Garcinia mangostana, jambu, Eugenia malacensis, Jambu ayer, Eugenia, Jambu ayer mawar, Eugenia jambos, pomegranate, Punica granatum, durian, nanka, Cetodium cauliflower, jampada, Cetodium, rambutan, jambolan, boa bidinar, Ramphus jujuba, namnam, Sinometra cauliflora, catapa, Terminalia catapa, canari, Canarium communi, madja, limonia, suntul, blimbing, Averrhoa bilimbi, blimbing bessie, Averrhoa carambola, cherima, Averrhoa acida, solac, Calamus rotang zelica. Besides these, they have several fruits, which the natives only eat, as Calarguilindina, Moringa succum, of 2 or 3 kinds, the same as is called breadfruit in the South Seas. All the kinds here, however, are so incomparably inferior to the South Seas ones, that was it not for the great similitude of the outward appearance of both tree and fruit, they would scarce deserve that name. Bilinju, netum nemon, boabuni, etc., etc. All which I shall pass over in silence, as not deserving to be mentioned to any but hungry people, and pass to those of a more graceful flavour, among the first of which the pineapple, called here nanas, will always appear. These are here very large and so plentiful, that in cheap times I have been told that a man who buys them at the first hand may get them for a farthing apiece. When we were there, we could get, without much haggling, 2 or 3 for 2 halfpenny at the common fruit shops. In quality they are certainly good and well flavoured, as good, but not a bit better, than those which are called good in England. So luxuriant are they in their growth, that most of them have 2 or 3 crowns, and a large number of suckers from the bottom of the fruit. I have counted 9. These are so forward that they often, while still adhering to the mother shoot, out their fruit, which by the time the large one is ripe, are come to a tolerably large size. Of these I have seen 3 upon one apple, and have been told that 9 have been seen, but that was esteemed so great a curiosity that it was preserved in sugar and sent to the Prince of Orange. 2. Oranges are tolerably good, but while we were here, were very dear, seldom less than 6d. apiece. 3. Pamplemoses, called in the West Indies shaddocks, were well flavoured, but had no juice in them, which we were told depended upon the season. 4. Lemons were very scarce, but the want of them was amply made up by the plenty of 5 limes, of which the best were to be bought for about 12d. a hundred. Seville oranges I saw 2 or 3 only, which were almost all peel. Besides these, there were many sorts of oranges and lemons, none of which are at all esteemed by Europeans, or indeed by the natives themselves. 6 mango. This fruit during our stay was so infested with maggots, which bred in the inside of them, that out of 10 scarce 4 would be free, nor were those which were by any means so good as those of Brazil. Europeans commonly compare this fruit with a melting peach, to which in softness and sweetness it certainly approaches, but in flavour as certainly falls much short of any that can be called good. The climate, as I have been told, here is too hot and damp for them, and on the coast of India they are much better. Here are as many sorts of them almost as of apples in England, some much superior to others. Some of the worst sorts are so bad that the natives themselves can hardly eat them when ripe, but use them as an acid when just full grown. One sort, called by them manga kawani, has so strong a smell that a European can scarce bear one in the room. These, however, the natives are fond of. The best sorts for eating are first manga dudul, incomparably better than any other. Next, manga shantok and manga guri, and besides these 3, I know no other which a European would at all be pleased with. 7 of bananas, here in likewise innumerable kinds, 3 only of which are good to eat as fruit, viz. Pisang mas, Pisang raja, and Pisang ambon, all of which have a tolerably vinous taste. The rest, however, are useful in their way. Some are fried with batter, others boiled in lieu of bread, which is here a dearer article than meat, etc. One of the sorts, however, deserves to be taken notice of by botanists, it being contrary to the nature of the rest of its tribe full of seeds, from whence it is called Pisang batu, or Pisang bidjis. It has, however, no excellence to recommend it to the taste, or any other way, except it is, as the Malayers think, good for the flux. 8. Grapes are to be had here, but in no great perfection. They are, however, sufficiently dear, a bunch about the size of a fist, costing a shilling or 18 pence. 9. Tamarinds are prodigiously common, and as cheap. The people, however, either do not know how to put them up as the West Indians do, or do not practise it, but cure them with salt, by which means they become a black mass, so disagreeable to the sight and taste that few Europeans choose to meddle with them. 10. Watermelons are plentiful and good, as are also 11 pumpkins, which are certainly almost or quite the most useful fruit which can be carried to sea, keeping without any care for several months, and making with sugar and lemon juice a pie hardly to be distinguished from apple pie, as well as with pepper and salt, a substitute for turnips not to be despised. 12. Pawpaws. This fruit, when ripe, is full of seeds and almost without flavour, but while green, if pared, the core taken out and boiled, is also as good or better than turnips. 13. Guava is a fruit praised much by the inhabitants of our West Indies, who I suppose have a better sort than we met with here, where the smell of them alone was so abominably strong that Dr. Solander, whose stomach is very delicate, could not even bear them in the room, nor did their taste make any amends, partaking much of the goatish rankness of their smell. Baked in pies, however, they lost much of this rankness, and we less nice ones eat them very well. 14. Sweet sop. Also a West Indian fruit is nothing but a vast quantity of large kernels, from which a small proportion of very sweet pulp may be sucked, but almost totally devoid of flavour. 15. Custard apple likewise is common to our West Indies, where it has got its name, which well enough expresses its qualities, for certainly it is like a custard, and a good one too, as can be imagined. 16. Cashew apple is seldom or never eat, on account of its astringency. The nut that grows on the top of it is well known in Europe, where it is brought from the West Indies. 17. Coconut is well known everywhere between the tropics. Of it are infinite different sorts. The best we met with for drinking is called Kalapa Edju, and easily known by the redness of the flesh between the skin and the shell. 18. Mangostan. As this and some more fruits are peculiar to the East Indies, I shall give a short description of them. This is about the size of a crab apple, and of a deep red wine colour. At the top of them is a mark made by 5 or 6 small triangles joined in a circle, and at the bottom several hollow green leaves, the remains of the flower. When they are to be eaten, the skin, or rather flesh, which is thick, must be taken off, under which are found 6 or 7 white kernels, placed in a circular figure. The pulp with which these are enveloped is what is eat, and few things I believe are more delicious. So agreeably is acid mixed with sweet in this fruit, that without any other flavour it comes in competition with, if not excels, the finest flavoured fruits. So wholesome also are these mangostans, that they, as well as sweet oranges, are allowed without stint to people in the highest fevers. 19. Jambu is esteemed also a most wholesome fruit. It is of a deep red and oval shape, the largest as big as a small apple. It has not much flavour, but is certainly very pleasant, on account of its coolness. There are several sorts of it, but without much reference to the kinds, the largest and reddest are always the best. 20. Jambu Iyer. Of these are 2 sorts, alike in shape, resembling a bell, but differing, one red and the other white. In size they a little exceed a large cherry. In taste they are totally devoid of flavour or even sweetness, being nothing more than water a little acidulated, and yet their coolness recommends them very much. 21. Jambu Iyer Mawar is more pleasant to the smell than the taste, in the latter resembling something the conserve of roses, as in the former the fresh scent of those flowers. 22. Pomegranate is the same fruit in England, and everywhere else that I have met with it, in my opinion, but ill repaying anyone who takes the trouble of breaking its tough hide. 23. Durian in shape resembles something a small melon, but has a skin covered over with sharp conical spines, whence the name dur, signifying in the Malay language a spine. This fruit, when ripe, divides itself longitudinally into 7 or 8 compartments, each of which contains 6 or 7 nuts, not quite so large as chestnuts, coated over with a substance, both in colour and consistency, resembling much very thick cream. This is the delicate part of the fruit, which the natives are vastly fond of, but few Europeans at first, however, can endure its taste, which resembles sugared cream mixed with onions. The smell also prejudices them much against it, being most like that of rotten onions. 24. Nanka, called in some parts of India jack, has, like the durian, a smell very disagreeable to strangers, like very mellow apples with a little garlic. The taste, however, in my opinion, makes amends for the smell, though I must say that among us English I believe I was single in that opinion. Authors tell strange stories of the immense size to which this fruit grows in some countries which are favourable to it. Rumphius says that they are sometimes so large that a man cannot easily lift one of them. The Malays told me that at Madura they were so large that 2 men could but carry one of them. At Batavia, however, they never exceed the size of a large melon, which in shape they resemble, but are coated over with angular spines, like the shootings of some crystals, which, however, are soft, and do not at all prick anyone who handles them. 25. Jampada differs from Nanka in little else than size. 26. Rambutan is a fruit seldom mentioned by Europeans. It is in appearance much like a chestnut with a husk on, being like it covered with soft prickles, but smaller and of a deep red colour. When eaten, the skin must be cut, and under it is a fruit, the flesh of which indeed bears but a small proportion to the stone, but makes rich amends for the smallness of its quantity by the elegance of its acid, superior to any other may be in the whole vegetable kingdom. 27. Jambalon is in size and appearance not unlike a damson in England, but has always rather too astringent a flavour to allow it to be compared even with that fruit. 28. Boa bidara is a round yellow fruit about the size of a musket ball. In flavour it is compared to an apple, but like the former, has too much astringency to be compared with anything but a crab. 29. Num num is shaped something like a kidney, very rough and rugged on the outside, and about 3 inches long. It is seldom eaten raw, but fried with batter makes very good fritters. 30. Catapa, 31. Canary are both nuts, the kernels of which are compared to almonds, and indeed are full as sweet, but the difficulty of getting their kernels out of their tough rinds and hard shells is so great that they are nowhere publicly sold, nor did I taste any others than those which for curiosity's sake I gathered from the tree and had opened under it. 31. Madja, under a hardish brittle shell, contains a lightly acid pulp, which is not eat unless mixed with sugar, nor is it then to be called pleasant. 33. Suntul is by far the worst fruit of any I have or shall mention. It is in size and shape much like madja, as large as a middling apple but rounder. It has a thick hide containing within it kernels like the mangostan, the taste of which is both acid and astringent, without one merit to recommend it. Indeed, I should not have thought it eatable, had I not seen it often publicly exposed to sale upon the fruit stalls. 34. Blimbing. 35. Blimbing Bessie. 36. Cherima are all 3 species of one genus, which, though they differ much in shape, agree in being equally acid, too much so to be used without dressing, except only Blimbing Bessie, which is sweeter than the other 2. They make, however, excellent sour sauce, and as good pickles. 37. Salac is the fruit of a most prickly bush. Itself is as big as a walnut and covered over with scales, like those of a lizard or snake. These scales, however, easily strip off, and leave 2 or 3 soft and yellow kernels, in flavour to me resembling a little strawberries. In this, however, I was particular, for no one but myself liked them. In short, I believe I may say that bad as the character is that I have given of these fruits, I eat as many of them as anyone, and at the time thought as well and spoke as well of them as the best friends they had. My opinions were then as they are now. Whether my shipmates may change theirs between here and home, I cannot tell. Besides, they no doubt have many more, which were not in season during our stay. We were told also that several kinds of European fruits had been planted up in the mountains, where they came to great perfection, but this I can only advance upon the credit of report. Several other fruits they have, also which they preserve in sugar, as kimkit, boa atap, etc., etc., but these require to be that way prepared before they are at all eatable. Batavia consumes a quantity of fruits hardly to be believed, the greatest part of which, before they are sold, are overripe or otherwise bad, nor can a stranger easily get any that are good unless he goes to a street called Pasar Pasang, which lies north from the great church and very near it. Here live none but Chinese, who sell fruit. They are in general supplied from gentlemen's gardens in the neighbourhood of the town, and consequently have the best and always fresh. For this excellence of their goods, however, they are well paid, for they will not take less for any kind than 3 or 4 times as much as the market price. Nor did we ever grudge to give it, as their fruit was always 10 times better than any in the market. The chief supplies of Batavia come from a pretty considerable distance, where great quantities of land are cultivated merely for the sake of fruits. The country people to whom these land belong meet the townspeople at 2 great markets, one on Mondays, called Pasar Senin, the other on Saturdays, called Pasar Tanbank, held in very different places for the convenience of different districts, each, however, about 5 miles from Batavia. Here the best of the fruits may be got at the cheapest rates. The sight of these markets is to a European very entertaining. The immense quantities of fruit exposed here is almost beyond belief. 40 or 50 cartloads of pineapples, packed as carelessly as we would do turnips in England, is nothing extraordinary, and everything else is in the same profusion. The time of these markets is, however, so ill contrived, that as on Monday and Saturday, all the fruit for the ensuing week, both for retailers and housekeepers, must be bought in. Before Friday there is no good fruit in the hands of any people but the Chinese in Pasar Pasang. Thus much for meat. In the article of drink, nature has not been quite so bounteous to the inhabitants of this island as she has to some of us sons of the less abundant north. They are not, however, totally devoid of strong liquors, though their religion, Mahometanism, forbids them the use of such, by this means driving them from liquid to solid intoxicators, as opium, tobacco, etc., etc. Besides their arrack, which is too well known in Europe to need any description, they have palm wine, made from a species of palm called in the Malay and Javan language aran. This liquor is extracted from the branches, which were to have borne flowers, but are cut by the people who make it their business, and joints of bamboo cane hung under them, into which the liquor, intended for nature for the nourishment of both flowers and fruit, distills in tolerable abundance. And so true is nature to her paths, that as long as the fruit of that branch would have remained unripe, so long she supplies the liquor or sap, but no longer. This liquor is sold in 3 states. The first is almost as it comes from the tree, prepared only a little by some method unknown to me, which causes it to keep 36 or 48 hours, instead of only 12. In this state it is sweet and pleasant, only tasting a little of smoke, which, though at first disagreeable, becomes agreeable by use, and not at all intoxicating. It is called tuak manis, or sweet palm wine. The other 2, one of which is called tuak kras, and the other tuak kuning, are prepared by laying certain herbs and roots in them, and then fermenting so that their taste is altered from sweet to a rather astringent and disagreeable taste, and they have acquired the property of intoxicating in a pretty high degree. Besides this, they have tuak from the coconut tree, but very little of this is drank as a liquor, it being mostly used for putting into the arrack, in which, when intended to be good, it is a necessary ingredient. Next to eating and drinking, and one more delicious as well as less blamable luxury, the inhabitants of this part of India seem to place their chief delight in sweet smells, of burning rosins, etc., and sweet-scented woods, but more than all in sweet flowers, of which they have several sorts very different from ours in Europe, of which I shall give a short account, confining myself, however, to such as were in season during our stay here, beginning with a list of them. All these sorts were sold about the streets every night at sunset, either strung upon strings in wreaths of about 2 feet, a Dutch L long, or made up into different sorts of nosegays, either of which cost about a halfpenny apiece. But I shall now proceed to give a short description of each. 1. Champaka. It grows upon a tree as large as an apple tree, and like its spreading, the flower itself consisting of 15 longish, narrow petala, which give it the appearance of being double, though in reality it is not. Its colour is yellow, much deeper than that of a jonquil, which flower, however, it somewhat resembles in scent, only is not so violently strong. 2. Cananga is a green flower, not at all resembling any European flower, either in appearance, which is much more like a bunch of leaves than a flower, or smell, which, however, is very agreeable. 3. Mulati is well known in English hothouses under the name of Arabian jasmine. It is here in prodigious abundance, and certainly as fragrant as any flower they have, but of this, as well as all the Indian flowers, it may be said that though full as sweet as any European ones, even of the same sorts, they have not that overcoming strength. In short, their smell, though very much the same, is much more delicate and elegant than any we can boast of. 4 and 5, Combang Caracnasi and Combang Tonquin, are much alike in shape and smell, small flowers of the dog's bane kind, hardly to be compared to any in our English gardens, but like all the past most elegant in their fragrance. 6. Sundal Malam, the same as our English tuberose. This flower is less in size considerably, as well as more mildly fragrant than ours in Europe. The Malay name signifies intriguer of the night, from an idea rather pretty. The heat of the climate here allows few or no flowers to smell in the day, and this especially, from its want of smell and modest white array, seems not at all desirous of admirers. But when night comes, its fragrance is diffused around and attracts the attention, as well as gains the admiration of every passer-by. 7. Bonggong Tanjong is shaped quite like a star of 7 or 8 rays, about 1/2 an inch in diameter. It is of a yellowish colour, and like its fellows, a modest, agreeable smell. But its chief use is contrasting the mulati on the wreaths which the ladies here wear in their hair, and this it does very prettily. Besides these, there are, in private gardens, many other sweet flowers which are not in sufficient plenty to be brought to market, as Cape jasmine, several sorts of Arabian jasmine, though none so sweet as the common, etc., etc. Table of flowers and species names. 1. Champaca, Michaelia champaca. 2. Cananga, Uvaria cananga. 3. Mulati, Nyctanthes sambac. 4. Caracnasi. 5. Combang Tonquin, Pergularia glabra. 6. Sundal Malam, Poanthes tuberosa. 7. Bonga Tanjong, Mimosaups elengi. They have also a mixture of several of these flowers and leaves of a plant called pandang, pandanus, chopped small, with which they fill their hair and cloths, etc. But their great luxury is strewing their beds full of this mixture and flowers, so that you sleep in the midst of perfumes. A luxury scarce to be expressed, nor at all conceived in Europe, where stewing under 3 or 4 blankets, even fragrant odours cannot enjoy that liberty they do in India under none, or at most the covering of a single piece of fine chintz. Before I leave the productions of this country, I cannot help saying a word or two about spice, though in reality none but pepper is a native of the island of Java, and but little even of that. Of pepper, however, I may say that large as the quantities of it are that are annually imported into Europe, little or none is used in this part of the Indies. Capsicum, or cayenne pepper, as it is called in Europe, has almost totally supplied its place. As for cloves and nutmegs, the monopoly of the Dutch has made them too dear to be plentifully used by the Malays, who are otherwise very fond of them. Cloves, though said to be originally the produce of Makian or Bakian, a small island far to the eastward, and only 15 miles to the northward of the line, from whence they were, when the Dutch came here, disseminated over most or all of the eastern isles, are now entirely confined to Amboina and its neighbouring small isles. The Dutch, having by different treaties of peace made with the conquered kings of all the other islands, stipulated that they should have only a certain number of trees in their dominions, and in future quarrels as a punishment, lessened their quantity till at last they have left them none, nor any right to have any. Nutmegs have been in the same manner extirpated in all the island, except their native Banda, which easily supplies this world, and would as easily supply another, if the Dutch had but another to supply. Of nutmegs, however, there certainly are a few upon the eastern coast of New Guinea, a place on which the Dutch hardly dare set their feet, on account of the treachery and warlike disposition of the natives. There may be also both cloves and nutmegs upon others of the islands far to the eastward, for those I believe neither the Dutch nor any other nation seem to think it worthwhile to examine at all into. End of section 54. Part 2 of Some Account of Batavia.